Around here on Trace Velo, I'm known for dealing in cheap bike parts, but whenever I see something on AliExpress that's an obvious rip-off, it really piques my interest. A real JuinTech F1 caliper, about 150 quid for the pair, 75 quid each. So how can they sell what appears to be an identical looking one for just 16 quid? Like, what corners have they cut to bring the price that low? And will it even work? Now, fair warning here, this episode did not go the way that I planned it. So yeah, stick around. My name, as always, is Luke, and welcome back to Trace Velo. Now, it's no mystery that I have a bit of a soft spot for mechanical disc brakes. I ran these JuinTech F1 calipers for over a year back when I lived in Cornwall, and the hills around there are no joke. So I put them through their paces, let's just say that much. So recently I was mooching around on AliExpress and I came across these. Apart from the color and the brand name that's on them, they look incredibly similar to a JuinTech caliper, but like 4.5 times cheaper. Now, they're not made by JuinTech and are undoubtedly fakes. So let's take a look at this thing, because corners have definitely been cut in the manufacture to bring the costs down. Then I'll stick them on the bike, see if they actually work, and I'll also tear them apart to kind of compare the innards as well. So let's crack on. So the first thing that struck me was the quality of the die casting. The F1 caliper here, it's made of two halves that are bolted together. Each half is made of cast aluminium, which is nicely finished with polishing and tumbling to get a decent smooth surface with nice rounded edges where necessary. This is the knockoff caliper, and hopefully you can sort of instantly spot the difference. The casting is much lower quality, or at the very least, the finishing is much rougher and more rushed. You can still see some machining marks around the edges here, and there's still a lot of pitting present on both halves, presumably left over from the casting process. There are also areas where there may have been some debris left in the mold, or maybe the aluminium wasn't forced in at high enough pressure. Either way, this area and the casting, it's got a small void that's not present on the JuinTech caliper. So look, they undoubtedly saved money on the casting process. The quality definitely falls behind the JuinTech. Now, aluminium can actually hold quite a lot of dissolved gas inside it in its molten state. Now, you can degas it by bubbling argon or nitrogen through the molten aluminium, but if this process is skipped or it's done poorly, bubbles and cavities can form inside the casting when it cools down. And now, although the casting itself does look a little bit rough, I can't see any evidence of this from the outside, but the bubbles can be very, very small, and ultimately it is more of a risk with a cheaper casting like this, and bubbles like that can severely impact the overall strength of the piece. Now, other areas they've cut out cost. The seal to keep the moisture and dirt out of the master cylinder is a bit more basic. The feet of the caliper don't have these indexing slots for the adapter plate. The cable clamp arm doesn't include a nicely cut recess for the brake cable, and the pad adjustment screw doesn't have a nicely notched knob like the JuinTech caliper. Now, the final difference, JuinTech supply brake pads with their own resin compound, whereas the knockoff caliper uses a generic brake pad, which seems to be sintered metal or metallic. So this cheaper caliper, it's clearly not up to the build quality of the JuinTech, and they've definitely cut some corners to keep the costs of manufacture nice and low. But what's the braking performance like? Well, earlier in the week, I got it slapped on the bike, so let's find out. So the installation was an absolute breeze, no problem at all. And here's some footage of me riding to my little testing hill that I tend to go to. It was an absolutely gorgeous day, which really helped. And as always, if you fancy any of the gear that I'm wearing in these shots, check out my sponsor, Sirocco. They do some great value cycle clothing, plus it looks awesome. And a lot of you guys seem to like it too, which is really wicked to see. So yeah, I can get you 10% off everything, link in the description. And anything you buy via that link helps me out a bit too, which is cool. Anyway, let's crack on. Okay, right, big hill down here behind me, and it goes down the hill and then just up into another one, and there's no roads that cross it either. So if I do face an issue with these brakes, I've got a massive runoff, so I should be absolutely fine. Now, it took me about an hour to get here, and on the way, I was quite impressed with them, actually, which did surprise me. I just thought they were going to be absolute trash, but they work really nicely. I think it's more to do with the sintered metal brake pad compound in here. So I've actually bought the JuinTech calipers along as well. So I'll swap out the brake pads in here onto the JuinTechs and see if the performance is the same, any better. Just for whatever reason, they bite really nicely with this particular disc rotor. So yeah, we'll see how we get on. So let's go. So look, as mentioned, I was expecting this cheap caliper to be rubbish and kind of hoping it would be, but I've got to be honest with you, it was great. Surprisingly strong braking, and the level of bite you could feel was very, very high. However, after a couple of good runs down the hill, you could tell the brake pad compound was really punishing on the disc rotors. It got incredibly hot with sustained braking, and you can hear the disc rotor pinging here at the bottom of the hill. So yeah, I was very impressed, but was it the caliper or the brake pad compound? Back at the top, I swapped over to the legit JuinTech caliper, but swapped out the brake pads. I've mentioned before, I'm not really a fan of the stock compound that JuinTech supplies with their brakes. I've just never been impressed with it. So let's try these magic gold brake pads. Now, it's probably worth stating I've done a lot of testing with different brake pad compounds recently. So if you haven't seen it already, you might want to go and watch this episode I did a couple of weeks back where I tested all 4 different types and showed you their characteristics. But in this instance, yeah, I can safely say those gold brake pads are the special sauce here. Now, braking with the JuinTech caliper was definitely better. It just feels much tighter and much more responsive compared to that knockoff one. But those brake pads, wow. I mean, I used to swear up and down that semi-metallic brake pads were best for mechanical disc setups, but these sintered metal ones just blow them out of the water. As mentioned, they seem to be very harsh on the disc rotors. After 20 or so hard emergency style stops, you can see they've scored a visible track into the steel of the disc rotor, but I cannot argue with the results. Incredible braking performance for this style of caliper. Okay, so yeah, I'll get to those brake pads in a second, but I did promise earlier that I was going to tear this thing open and compare the innards. So yeah, let's do that quickly. So just in case you're unaware, these are both hybrid hydraulic calipers. Each unit is essentially a closed loop of oil. You pull the brake lever, which compresses the master cylinder, and 2 pistons push the pads onto the disc. Now, cracking these open was a breeze. Just loosen the 2 bolts and both sides come apart. There's a single channel at the bottom here that allows the oil pressure to equalize between the 2 halves, and there's a little rubber gasket to help seal things up. Now, honestly, the knockoff caliper, it looked okay, but unsurprisingly, the JuinTech was just better. After popping out the pistons, much like the outside, you can see there are some machining marks left on the cheaper caliper. These aren't present on the JuinTech, but there are 2 main things that make the JuinTech better. Firstly, the channels drilled for oil to flow through are just better optimized. You can see this channel has a nice shallow cut on the JuinTech, which pushes the oil directly beneath the piston, whereas on the cheaper caliper, it's a bit more difficult to see, but the channel is just drilled into the bottom edge of this wall. On the other side, it's a similar story. The JuinTech has recesses cut to help the oil push the piston properly from beneath, whereas the cheaper one has a recess cut for the bleed port, but the other oil channel is hidden away up on the side wall here. This could be a problem because if the piston bottoms out on the cheaper caliper, the oil could struggle to push the piston out in time. Essentially, you're more likely to get a lazy piston with the cheaper caliper. The second thing is that the diameter of the JuinTech pistons are a little smaller, 1.1 millimeters smaller to be precise, and a smaller piston will essentially mean slightly higher pressure at the brake pad. Not by much, but it will be higher. So yeah, the cheaper caliper, it looks all right, but yeah, the JuinTech, much nicer overall, definitely takes the win here. So the story so far, this JuinTech caliper, despite having done around 2,000 miles at this point, still works great. The build quality is fantastic, very confidence inspiring. The knockoff caliper, well, works pretty well, but corners have been cut to keep the price nice and low. It's clearly been made in a bit of a rush. I'm not sure I would trust it long term, not recommended. But those brake pads, they really took me by surprise. Essentially because a couple weeks back, I was on the very same hill using the very same JuinTech caliper, just with the stock brake pads. Those golden ones, they're so much better, it's almost unbelievable. The amount of bite that you can feel through the brakes, it was just crazy. The stock JuinTech compound had a tendency to fade quite easily under sustained heavy braking. But I get the feeling those golden brake pads are just so abrasive that they circumvent that issue entirely, and they just kept on biting. I just get the feeling they really suited that caliper and the type of braking I was doing. Like I mentioned, I've said time and again that a semi-metallic brake pad compound was the best one for mechanical disc brakes. I dismissed sintered metal for this application because I thought it was a bit too extreme. But after testing those golden brake pads for the last week, I'm gonna have to revisit that. So yeah, don't get this caliper, but if you do run JuinTech F1s, definitely consider getting some sintered metal brake pads. Now do bear in mind, they absolutely munch through disc rotors. Now it's not a problem for me because all the ones I run are really cheap, but if you run those kind of really spenny Ice Tech ones, then yeah, maybe think twice, just because they are so abrasive. But either way, I've left some links down there in the description in case you want to check them out. Now, this whole thing might seem a bit overblown, right? I'm getting really excited about a different disc brake compound, but I try really hard to get the very best performance I can out of my mechanical disc brake setups, purely because I know they do fall quite far behind fully hydraulic group sets. So when I come across something like this that gets me that little bit of extra braking performance, it's a big win for me. So I do get quite excited by it. So yeah, anyway, subscribe if you like this kind of thing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this rather manic episode today. And if you've got any questions or comments, then yeah, let me know. Baguette emojis are always welcome. Right, anyway, I'm probably gonna spend the next few hours tinkering around with some of my other mechanical disc brake setups that I've got in this box, because I think I might be onto something. Anyway, enough of that. I'll see you next time. Ciao. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
It's the bonus clip time.
So I did actually end up spending a good few hours fiddling around with some calipers that I had up in that box up there. So let me show you which ones they are. So these are the calipers. They're from Z-Race. I've had these a little while, but I found some fully metallic brake pads for the front and the back. I ran these before with semi-metallic pads and they were pretty good. But yeah, once again, with fully metallic brake pads, the bite is really strong. So I think I'm definitely onto something with this style of brake pad in a mechanical disc caliper. Now, I would have done some testing against fully hydraulic brakes in this episode, but here's my bike, which has hydraulic brakes, and it's in bits at the moment because once again, this Trifox frame has let me down. Those of you that watch my stuff might know that I had an issue with this frame where the front derailleur hanger came loose, and let me show you. Once again, it's happened. So can you see if it'll focus? See that? It's come loose again, and I basically riveted it back on and epoxied it onto the bare carbon of the frame, but yeah, it's come loose again. So the shifting at the front is now absolute trash. So this bike is out of commission. I've given this Trifox frame so many chances, but issues keep cropping up time and again. So I think I'm done. I've got another frame on the way, and I'll get this group set put onto that frame. But yeah, this Trifox, steer clear, because I don't think it's worth the hassle. Look at that. I could maybe fix it, but I don't think I can be bothered to fix it again, because I imagine even if I re-epoxied it on, I'd have the same problem. Anyway, you might have noticed that I'm running some quite tasty looking tan sidewall tires here actually. And normally with tires, I tend to buy sort of decent name brand tires. So well, my favorites are actually Schwalbe 1 or Schwalbe Pro 1 tires. These are tubeless. They cost about 40 quid each though. So I'm taking a bit of a punt on some tires from China. This is, well, these ones aren't tubeless, but they're from a brand called CST. I think they're a parent company to Maxxis, and Maxxis makes some pretty good mountain bike tires. But I've got a few other tires from AliExpress that I'm testing out at the minute. These have done really nicely actually, and they look lovely. I've been running them for about a week, but I've also got some of these. So these are tubeless tires from iiiPro, which again is another Chinese brand. So I'm desperate to try these out. These are 700 by 30C actually. So yeah, basically loads to test. So yeah, stay tuned and I'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao, ciao.